Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. In this session, we're going to be talking through how best to engage with providers in order to support them to complete the fair cost of care exercises. And we've got a range of different speakers coming up to go through that. Just to introduce myself quickly, my name's Dan Mould and I work in the Care and Health Improvement Programme, which is jointly run by ADAS and the LGA in the commissioning and market shaping team focused on supporting commissioners. And so I just want to go through a few housekeeping issues before I hand over to my colleague Leon Goddard, who's going to speak a bit about the background of the exercise and the scope of the exercise and some of our advice and guidance to council. So everyone should be automatically muted and videos will be off throughout the session, but please do share any questions through the chat function, which we'll pick up with the speaker panel following the presentations. There'll be plenty of time for Q&A after the presentations, and this session is being recorded as well, and we'll be sharing that online with people as well as the slides. Slides will be emailed to everyone as soon as possible after the session finishes, and we'll also be getting in touch to let people know when the videos are up on YouTube. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Really hope this session is helpful, and please do send as many comments and questions through the chat as possible. So I'm now going to move on to the next slide and invite Leon to come in and begin talking through the background of this exercise.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm conscious we've just got a few late joiners. You've not missed anything other than the usual housekeeping. I'll introduce myself. My name's Leon Goddard. I work with Dan in the Care and Health Improvement Programme. Mine and our role is mainly focused on supporting councils. So as part of this process, that's our main responsibility. But we're also working closely with care provider organisations, and we've got Richard on the call today, and also working closely with the Department of Health as well. And I would say to find a practical way of applying the guidance that they've issued. So I'll touch upon that more in a moment, but this is really about offering new thoughts on how you can best face the sort of challenging circumstances and timescales that you've got. So I just want to start by bringing everyone up to speed and kind of reiterating why we're here really, what are the conditions. So the slide in front of you here just touches upon the initial policy issued by the Department of Health in December 2021 and sets out 3 tranches of funding. What we're going to be focusing on today really is how we get to mid-October, and therefore the first tranche of funding, the 162 million, is most relevant. But I just wanted to set the scene a little wider to start with. If we can have a look at the next slide. So what we're looking at here are the very specific grant conditions, and again I've tried to boil them down as much as I can to what councils need to do by mid-October. The first 2 requirements relate to a specific Excel document, and the links in there, in the slide, and it's referred to as Annex A. But essentially, there's 2 things, and it's probably about as simple a spreadsheet as could be requested, recognising that the work to get there is very complex. The first thing is for you to submit the median cost lines for the median figures for each cost line on home carers, care and nursing care, and that's in the cost of care table. And then the second thing is again to give a very simple overview of how you have and how you will spend the grant. So again, it's simply indicating the service area, generally what you're using that for and how much. So that will be submitted through an Excel document. The cost of care report is a written report that you'll describe how you undertook this exercise, how you engage providers, etc. And then the final requirement, and I think it's by far the most challenging and time consuming, and that's the production of a market sustainability plan. We won't go too much into that detail on that at the moment. Suffice to say that we're working with colleagues, council colleagues, provider colleagues in the department as well, to really bring to life what the plan should contain, and we'll be sharing support around the content, the approach, the process in due course. Let's move on to the next slide, Dan. So here's where we get into, hopefully we've all read the Department of Health guidance, but there are elements of that that are unclear, or where there's just the practical reality means that it's not as simple as just reading the guidance. But what you've got in front of you here is how I think is the best way to kind of think of and communicate the guidance. So this is about all care homes in your area, and it's about those that predominantly provide care to older people. So it's not about only those who only provide care to older people, or those who may by chance provide care to an older person. It's about their purpose, their intent. And CQC registration will take you so far, but again, I would advise people to come back on what's the main purpose of this provider. If it's to provide care to older people, treat them as in scope. What I would encourage is that you, where there are any doubts, speak to your providers, so people aren't wasting their time when actually they're out of scope. Domiciliary care, I would say slightly simpler. This is for people aged over 18. And again, I use the phrase time and task, and I'm not sure that's a particularly fair or kind phrase, but it's about that domiciliary home care that we know is delivered relatively short visits, back-to-back visits, where the main focus is to support people with daily living tasks. What is out of scope of this exercise are things like rapid response, reablement, living provision, a council's own provided provision, and also that in supported living and extra care. Again, that won't be a perfect fit, but if, for instance, you've got providers who deliver, the vast majority of what they deliver is time and task, the fact they may also deliver rapid response living provision shouldn't make them out of scope. It's about focusing on really what their general approach and intention is. Just the issues which are obvious for us all to see, which I've already touched on. Some providers will deliver a mix. Again, it's going with a kind of, yeah, but what's your main purpose? What's your main focus? And finally, just reiterating that need for local areas to work together. The feedback we've had is that most providers know what they are and if they're in scope and out of scope, and most councils know what the intention and the main focus of a care home is. And we'd really encourage people to go with what seems most obvious. Just to say that nobody will be sat in the background ticking off, you know, did you ask them? Did you ask them? Are they in scope or not? So this is about what you locally find workable. Okay. So moving on to the reason we're here, provider engagement. Again, just highlighting kind of what is and what isn't required. So the first thing is the Department of Health guidance very explicitly says cost of care exercises are a process of engagement and partnership working. And I think that everything else should stem from that, the sort of the spirit of this exercise. In terms of what councils are required to do, you should be taking all reasonable efforts to engage with providers, to encourage providers to participate. What you should also be doing is making sure that you're able to evidence that. And this is not about creating reams of we did this on this date, this on this date, but it's about making sure that if asked, you're able to set out a very logical plan of, we had this session on this day, we then followed it up with this activity, we then followed it up with this further session, that there's a real clear sense of a logical way of engaging with providers. So that's essentially what's required of you in terms of the grant conditions. I think what's not required is probably more helpful. Nobody has, and I don't expect will, place any specific target or minimum requirement around provider participation. There's not a percentage figure, there's not a numerical figure, there's no minimum, that nobody's described what that looks like, nor is there any requirement for you to take this specific action or that specific action. And in a minute, when we look at some of the things you might do, please treat them as what makes most sense in your local area, rather than treat them as you're required to do A, B or C. Okay, and it's also worth saying providers do not have to participate. We'll talk in a minute. Hopefully Richard will talk about why he thinks it's a good idea. But this is a process that we are encouraging them to participate in. And I think it's worth thinking that in terms of how you approach the communication. And as ever, we've seen some examples of good practice. seen some examples of not so good practice. Okay, Dan, you can move us on. Take this with a slight pinch of salt, but I've tried to just focus in on the things that you should have done by now, and if not, you might want to do pretty quickly. Thinking about what you should be in the process of doing, and then thinking about what you might helpfully do as well. I would say by this point, all providers in your area should be clear on what tools you're using, what your approach is, are you using a third party, what the timescales are, what the expectations are. That then basic details should be known and clear and understood by this stage. And if not, again, we would encourage people to do that quickly. If you're asking something slightly different in terms of scope, maybe you are wanting to bring in other providers, again, that should be clear. Although we'd perhaps discourage you doing that, we'd certainly encourage you to make it clear. By verification, there might come a point where you ask for more information from providers. That might be things like sharing staff rotas to give a sense of supporting information from what they've provided. Again, these things should be clear and upfront rather than asked at the last minute. The next point is partly around data security and what measures you've got in place. Is there an information sharing protocol, especially if third parties are being used? I think there's also something in there about trust, and it's probably as much about the council setting out its intentions and how it will work, rather than the specific, is a protocol in place or not? And we might come on to that in a minute around reasons why providers may be reluctant to engage. Well, we'll come on to that now, around transparency and trust. For instance, are you sharing anonymous data with providers throughout the exercise? If you are, then clearly you're taking a step in the right direction around, we're going to keep you informed as to what we're doing. If actually people think they're submitting information into a black hole, clearly their desire to participate in that is going to be slightly lower. And again, we'll dig into that in a bit more detail shortly. Something which again I'd be encouraging councils to do. You'll all know the things you do and the challenges in your area that actually if you're going to change one thing, then that's probably a good place to start. And I'll just give an example of, if you can't find providers to take on 30-minute calls in rural areas, then that's probably a good place to start around some of the short-term things you might do through this process. Clearly there's more medium and long-term things you might try and do in the coming years around things like using more preventative support. But I would say the more that you can start and talk about those tangible things that you think you might be able to change with the grant funding, I think the more that will encourage providers to participate, even if you're not able to make specific commitments at such an early stage. And then lastly, we'll talk in a minute about the support available to providers as well. But the idea that you're encouraging providers and you're also setting out for them what support's available, again, feels like a good way of working. If you could just scroll on next. So I think as well, it's important to reflect back the experience we've heard around when people say I've got provider engagement issues, what do they mean? And by that, what do you mean? And what is your particular challenge? So the first one is we've heard a number of situations where councils are saying we've got 100 providers and 2 have responded within our deadline. Okay, that's clearly an issue of the quantity of providers. In no way is that representative. Some of the things that we would suggest you do, given the point in time we are in the process, is if you've started with a let's invite everyone, let's engage with every one of our providers, I would say you want to start thinking now around, okay, so we've got what we're going to get out of that approach. How can we start and be more tailored? A really good example, if you've got half a dozen preferred providers of domiciliary care and they deliver the vast majority of care, if you've not done so already, you'd want to be starting to talk to them providers about how can we get you to engage. But again, it's that notion of a targeted support, starting to hone in on those that have maybe expressed interest. And I think it's reasonable that some providers have made it absolutely clear under no circumstances will they participate. I would suggest you don't spend much time or effort talking to them when actually they've made their position clear. So it's really about what's the best use of your time and effort to get the best quantity of engagement. One idea that's being used effectively is you might work with or fund local care associations. Can you work with them to identify a representative group of providers? If you can move on to the next element of this, Dan, please. I would say this is the thing that's perhaps most invisible at this stage and perhaps not so prominent on the radar. It's all well and good having lots of submissions, but is the information contained within them robust and accurate? And if we park any sort of idea of how have providers approached this, have they submitted the right or wrong information, and just focus on the fact this is complex. It's complex to run a provider organisation, and it's complex to submit information that best reflects that. We would encourage people to just take a step back and think, what information is being shared with me? How best can I work with providers to corroborate and verify this information, recognising there's likely to be quite a lot of sort of inadvertent mistakes or confusion or lack of clarity on both sides. Again, one example we know a lot of councils have done is to bring a third party in to review those exercises. And if anyone's got any challenges doing that and actually doing that verification, if they want to come through to myself and Dan, we can start and help and maybe put you in touch with experts who could support you on that. Okay, and then the last element of this, Dan. And this is about representation. You might have got lots of providers who've submitted lots of returns, but if you know they're just simply not representative of the care providers you use, again, you might want to take specific actions to make sure you've got that representative sample. And I would encourage you to not just think about your own perspective on what's representative, but to get the views of maybe local provider organisations as well, and providers themselves, so you've got this overall picture of what's representative. And that might be about identifying, you know, for instance, smaller care home organisations tend to be unrepresented so far or have low levels of representation. Might you understand the issues that they're facing? You might seek particular volunteers. And what we've heard from some councils is where they are able to identify a relatively small group of providers and understand what their obstacles are, they've been able to make payments to allow those providers to bring in their accountants to help them. Again, that feels a very measured, common sense approach to some of the challenges that they're facing. But I'm now going to hand you over to Richard, who will give the provider perspective on this, and Richard can introduce himself.
Take me off mute. Couldn't get off mute then for a second, sorry about that. Hello, I'm Richard Ayres. I am part of Care England, but I'm also sort of seconded over to the Care Provider Alliance for the purpose of this exercise. So I'm living and breathing the fair cost of care exercise at the moment, and I've spent the last couple of weeks of my life demoing the various different tools and talking to local authorities and local authority providers about the cost of care. So I think Leon's covered pretty much everything in terms of the checklist, the things that we would expect you to do. How you engage with providers, the initial letter, regular updates, engaging with their local associations, supporting and working with the Care Provider Alliance. So we're offering lots of support, so making sure that you're working with us to provide that support, working with us or the third party tool providers to demo the tools, hosting webinars, and sort of, you know, potentially down the line some possible funding opportunities if we have some underrepresentation. I think the key motivators for engagement have really been clear, concise comms and cascade that has not had negative language in it. So a real confidence in the local authority that this is a centrally led exercise. It's a government initiative, and it's a once in a generation opportunity is the tone that we try to encourage. What we find that sort of detracts people from participating is the feel of, well, we've been through this before and nothing happened. There are still a large number of providers out there who are not associated to care associations, who their only form of cascade is via the local authorities, who feel this is just another cost of care exercise that they've probably never engaged with in the past and don't feel that it will generate any sustainable change. So again, other motivators from our perspective is where we're saying that we need you guys to participate in the process, because if you don't do so, it's going to hamper the local authorities' potential opportunity to secure the funding it needs to pay providers. We try to imply when we're talking to providers around, and it's easier for the associations to do this than it is for the council to do this, that if they don't participate, they are more likely to be done too. But the key motivator is when the providers understand and recognise that this is not a local authority individual exercise. It's part of a central government exercise designed at getting more funding for the sector. Simple language, as I said, a non-aggressive tone, and a commitment to sharing the data post-collection. So confidentiality has been a significant driver. There are a lot of providers that say, I'm not providing this level of sensitive information to local authorities. Some local authorities have chosen to collect self-funder data and self-funder revenue data, which is not a requirement of this exercise. There's nothing in the operational guidance that says you should collect revenue data. It's about collecting cost data. And so some providers are put off by that. So we discourage local authorities collecting revenue data because this is about understanding the costs and collating a fair cost of care. I think providers also struggle with the understanding of what the impact of 18.3 is. Those of us who work in this on a daily basis are living and breathing it, so we understand it. But the vast majority of providers are not associated to associations and work solely through the local authority, so they don't really understand the language or the narrative unless they are well read or versed in the goings on of the reforms in the sector. So clear, concise messaging is one of the key drivers. Trust still is one of the big issues. Those that are using third parties, providers either love that or hate it. Unfortunately, you can't please all providers all of the time, but generally speaking, we are encouraging the use of third parties, and we are sending out a very positive message to providers who are engaged by a third party to participate. I think probably the last thing from me to say is around the timelines, is that we need local authorities to be really clear on what those timelines are. So I know that on the National Care Cubed IEASY tool, there is a facility for providers, for councils to put the dates into the tool. And it's really important that they do so providers know exactly when they can participate, when they have to participate, and when they're going to be challenged by timelines. But again, one thing we have suggested to local authorities is that you offer the opportunity to submit data past your response timeline, because it may help to validate certain things down the line. The last point is one of the key drivers of engagement that we've seen is where the Care Provider Alliance has been engaged and the local association has been engaged and is supporting by offering demos, webinars, and joining in to do FAQs and answering problems that providers are incurring on a day-to-day basis. And that invitation is offered to all providers, or to all local authorities, sorry. A large number of you have taken that option up already. We encourage more of you to do so because we see it as a significant driver for engagement. And that's probably a good point for me to stop, Leon, unless anyone's got any questions for me, unless you want to take those at the end.
But I'm just going to get some slides up, but then invite Simon and John from ARC to speak to them. So 1 second, I'll just share my screen. But thanks for joining us, Simon and John, and they're going to talk a bit about their experience from completing exercises in the past and picking up developing the home care tool that we've been providing nationally for this exercise. So yeah, hand over to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. So we've just got a few points. They'll probably touch upon some of the things that Leon and Richard have said and elaborate on them a little bit more. We're coming at this from two perspectives, as Dan introduced. You know, we have historically done a lot of cost of care exercises, and you know, in developing the tool and running the support line, we obviously are answering a number of queries, particularly from providers. So a number of them relate to process and some of the, you know, the timescales and other issues about you know, why should we respond type questions. So we thought we'd feedback both aspects, hopefully give you a little bit of insight as well. So the first thing, the clear and reasonable timescales. Somewhat the timescales have been taken over by the requirement in terms of the 14th of October. So it's easy for me to say outside of that, you know, that this as a process takes probably longer than, you know, 12 weeks or whatever's left to the deadline submission. I think as you know, Richard said, in terms of use of the IEASY tool, you know, if there's functionality to make really clear what that deadline is, that's really important. we're currently delivering those exercises, and we know that you will set a deadline, and you will then have you'll then have, I suppose, a worry that, well, how many levels of responses do we need to extend that deadline? One of the things that I think is useful. I apologize. I'm probably going to use some anecdotes here, but there are things that are important to consider when we set a deadline. You obviously will have a couple of weeks before, and you'll be thinking, well, how many responses have we got? And the first point to make is that, well, if we set a deadline, people tend to work towards a deadline. For any of you, currently going through the pain of having to write, reports, we will work to deadlines. So not having responses in before that deadline doesn't mean that nothing's coming. What's really useful is to just constantly keep in contact with providers and ask the question about, do you intend on engaging with this, so that we can get an idea of how many people will respond. We often work on sort of like a rule of the concept of half-life. If you've got 100 people who say they're going to respond, then in reality the number of people who respond might be 50. So it's the concern when you're working towards a deadline isn't how many you've got at present. It'd be great if you can get them in, but people will work to a deadline. Consider, what's the market telling us? Are they going to engage, or are they not going to engage? Be sensitive about the data. So this is a point that Richard made about confidentiality, etc. I think if we put ourselves in providers' shoes, or if I use the analogy, I'm going to pick on Simon because I can do, as my colleague. If I pick up the phone to Simon and say, Simon, I need to know how much you earn, what you spend on X, Y, and Z, social activities, clothes, etc., etc. I ask him a lot of questions about what he earns and how he spends that money. Simon's going to find, well, Simon's first response is going to be, well, why are you asking me this? Or I'm not partaking in this. We don't give up that type of information very easily, or we shouldn't do, or we certainly probably don't. We do in certain circumstances when we know that there's a reason why we do that. So if I'm Simon's bank and I'm phoning for an interview with Simon because Simon's making a mortgage application, that set of questions that I'm asking him all of a sudden becomes a valid set of questions, because there's a reason Simon knows, aside from the fact that he's contacted me and is requested a mortgage application. He knows that there is a reason for doing this, and this comes back to, I think, what both Richard and Leon said about communicating the importance of this and the opportunity of this. This isn't just a collection of market research, a piece of analysis to inform cost. It's an opportunity for everyone to have their voice heard at a national level. That then becomes the reason. It becomes like the mortgage application for answering those questions. Transparent. So transparency is, I think all three of us also talked about this point. There's a temptation with any cost of care exercise to sort of say, right, we'll ask you for some data, and then at the end point we'll present something back. The more that, and this will be circumstance based, you might have external support, you might have a team working on this, you might have started and be well on your way, you might be just starting, so it will depend on circumstance. But the more, say, touch points you can have about how what you're doing with the data, seeking feedback, being transparent on that process, the more assurance and confidence that providers have in relation to the activity, and the more you will, in our experience, the more you will get out, more feedback you will get in relation to that process. Alongside that, be conscious of other factors, other things that are happening in relation to the provider market, but also other information sources. There's a wealth of information that that is available, through capacity tracker, through various other data collection things that may be able to support some of the data ask of providers. That will be driven by local circumstance. But the other thing as well is that we constantly have we'll do engagement with providers, or we'll have cancellations, because, as you're aware, COVID hasn't got away, and there's something there about trying to work flexibly with the market and trying to support them wherever you possibly can to partake in this process. And that's to do with as Leon set out at the start, this is the DHSC ask is as much about, how many responded and what was the process and was it open, was it transparent, did providers have an opportunity to engage? Something that I just wanted to pick up on, and this is, this is a reflection from historic exercises as well as where we sit now. There is a lot of time and effort that's going to be expended on your side, but also on the provider's side. That is a real opportunity to understand what's going on in the market. The market sustainability plan isn't just, what are some of the headlines that we know in relation to workforce recruitment and retention, cost of living, some of the cost pressures. There's opportunities to get some real insight around what's driving the market, what's positive, negative, and some examples of that might be, understanding the impact of, the way that you pay. So you've got cost, and then you've got the way that you commission services. So if you from a home care perspective, if you pay on a pro rata basis based on length of call, there's an opportunity to understand through your engagement with the market if that's working particularly well. From a care home perspective, we're obviously, I was going to say coming out of the pandemic, I've said that far too many times over the last 18 months, but there's some normality now that's approaching. Occupancy levels are vastly different now to what they have been historically, and we don't know what that trajectory is. That will be a key driver of cost in the future and an impact on sustainability. So there's a really valuable opportunity now to get some insight as part of this data collection, which will inform not only future commissioning intentions, specifications, but actually hopefully support delivery of a sustainable market.
I just to add to that, John, I just wanted to come in there and just say, for those authorities that have either started their engagement or are getting having conversations with providers, you'll probably get a lot of comments that are probably not related to the very dry, boring ask at hand, which is, just give me your costs, tell me your costs. And certainly what I can say from our perspective, we're supporting a handful of local authorities, but we speak to a lot of providers on a weekly basis. And what we're particularly interested in is the operating models. Care homes, home care businesses. There's a big mix of how services are put together, differences in terms and conditions, differences in the types of services that they deliver, which are all contributing factors to, why the makeup of that business is what it is. But these are really helpful things for, and I'm conscious that Leon mentioned the market sustainability planning at the top of the show. But these are all helpful things for you to know around, okay, what's the shape of my market going forward? What's it looking like? Are there more larger providers in the market? Are there smaller providers in the market? And if my registrations have gone up, what impact is that having on how I'm commissioning? And obviously that to an extent drives the scope, which Leon had talked to in terms of who you actually have to engage with as part of the DHSC cost of care. But take the opportunity, take the touch point as a, there is an ask to go out to the market and gather some intelligence, and make it more than just that cost of care if at all possible, because you can engagement will be a lot better if you do that, in our experience.
Next slide, please, Dan. Brilliant, thank you. So probably a key one for those of you who have started engagement and you're worried about low uptake. In our experience, one of the challenges that you've got is that you've got a contact list, a contact database, which may not be the right person. If I use care homes as an example, it might be that the contact that you have is the registered manager, because day-to-day quality assurance, various factors, that will be a point of contact for most of the discussions that you will have. Those tend to be, or it might be the registered manager for the home care provider. And if they're a larger organisation, they will tend to have an infrastructure. Now, the people who will be responsible for cost and this type of activity, people like regional directors, area directors, business development managers, or the owners. the contact list that you have and the correspondence that you go out with may not be the right person, and experience has told us, we've learned the hard way, that we can never assume that that email finds its way to the right person. So, you know, there's some sort of following up, and there's some work to sort of say, look, you know, if you're not the right person, who is the right person? And what I would say is, it's a valuable activity from your perspective, in terms of then you've got the contact for these type of conversations. For those of you who've got separate lists, you know, and you know, you have a sense of that, that's brilliant. But what experience has told us is that often the emails and the correspondence are going out to not necessarily the right people in the organisation. Another point, relationships are key, and you know, I'm assuming we've got a mixed audience here. You know, a lot of people, a lot of commissioners will be involved in this work. Think wider in terms of, you know, you may have support teams, you know, you may have quality assurance staff who have great relationships with providers. You may have, you know, other staff, other teams, so even social workers. You will have a network of people who come into contact with providers who may have really good relationships, who can act as a sort of nudge to say, look, have you seen this? This is really important. This is the reason why. It doesn't have to come from sort of a commissioner just to a provider. Use those really strong relationships where you've got them. Quality and quantity, Leon's touched upon. It's something that, as he rightly pointed out, it's kind of, we don't know what that position is just yet because it's a little bit too early. But I think just don't lose sight of that. You know, the race to try and drive up numbers, what you want is really good quality submissions so that you've got a sense of cost. I suppose just keep an eye on that is the thing that we would say.
I think just on that one, John, I think it just comes back to that messaging, and I know Richard talked earlier about the messaging that CPA are putting out, and it's exactly right. The quality that you get will be dependent on, as John has said and as Richard had said, is what are we asking for this information for? What's going to happen as a result of this? And obviously, you know, DHSC is a national exercise, and yeah, agree with Richard about the messaging around, you know, once in a generation opportunity. There's obviously specific funding attached to this. It probably won't happen again, or not for a long time. So it's if you ever do something and work with us at any point as a commissioner to a provider, if you work with us on this, that doesn't just drive engagement in terms of numbers. It drives people being able to take it with the seriousness that it's intended, and say, actually, yeah, it's really important that we get this right. So yeah, so I think there's two things there around the messaging actually improves quality as well as quantity.
The representation, obviously you will get a number of returns. There's different ways to look at this. There's, you know, does it represent the market that we purchase from? Do we have enough of a line of sight of returns from the market that we don't purchase from? Because this is about, you know, this is a market assessment. You know, you don't just want to stack all of the responses and the median based on, you know, provision that you would never purchase from. But similarly, you don't want to exclude provision that you may need to purchase from in the future. So there's a representation from a commissioning perspective, but there's also then nuances around things like geography as well. You know, we can't assume that, you know, all responses from an urban area in terms of home care, all responses from an urban area therefore represent, you know, the cost for delivering services across an entire geographic area, especially if you've got, you know, remote, more rural areas. Similarly, you know, from a care home perspective, we can't assume that, you know, all responses from a, you know, 15-bedded, you know, home would represent the cost related to a 60, 70-bedded home, and vice versa. So there's a does it represent the market that we know that we have question? And are we confident that therefore we'd represent that? I'm not saying that you will get a sufficient representation in relation to all of that market. It might be the case that, you know, after doing everything that you can do in relation to engagement, you've got the results that you've got. it's just that important for you to be clear that there are some caveats around that assessment. It doesn't provide, a sufficient representation from X, Y, or Z, if that makes sense. So I think that's everything from our perspective, unless you've got anything to add, Simon.
Yeah, I don't know if you touched on the last point about non-engagement.
Oh, sorry, yes, yeah.
But that's fine. I'll take that one. I've got another point as well. Yeah, John talked earlier about keeping in constant contact with your market. Getting to know whether someone intends to do something is just as good as, obviously, is much better than obviously sitting and waiting until a deadline approaches and kind of hearing silence from the market. So that keeping in touch is really important. But as part of that as well, and I would encourage you to do this as early on as possible. Don't necessarily wait until you've had a week or two in the market, but capture the reasons for why people don't think that they're gonna engage or that they want to contribute. So understanding some of the barriers, such as it's too time consuming, I'm not sure that anything's going to change as a result of this. If you know those things up front, there might be there's an opportunity there to say, okay, well, if you think it's too time consuming, why don't we sit and walk through? And then you can obviously ask some critical questions around costs. You can almost walk it through. I mean, we typically end up, we offer one-to-ones to providers where we work with local authorities, but we walk through a lot of the costs just on a one-to-one call, because it's daunting when people get get a big spreadsheet or a web platform or something to register and fill this in. So sometimes it's just as easy. It's much easier to just pick up the phone and say, well, look, tell you what, why don't we book an hour in? Bring with you everything that you've got and we'll walk through it, and you can take the Annex A almost then as an alternative and say, let's walk through these cost lines and say, help me understand how this works in your business. I guess that rolls into my my second point, although I didn't intend it to. That was quite a nice segue, quite a nice bridge, which is around flexibility. Obviously, there are templates. We'd obviously developed with the LGA last year a toolkit for home care. That's on the DHSC website. It's on the LGA website, and I know a lot of councils will be using it for the home care market. You've got IEASY's platform for care homes, but being flexible is going to be really important as well. If people are struggling with the toolkits that have just been referenced in guidance, but costs are costs, business costs are business costs. There's all sorts of other ways of being able to represent them, and particularly with your smaller providers that might not have enough time or might need support, particularly if they say, well, I'm going to have to ring my accountant. There's often sometimes easier ways of being able to engage on that front as well. So I would say flexibility is key there. That was just two for me, John.
Yeah, just one final point for me on that and the reasons for non-engagement. The reason why that is important is because, as Simon alluded to, where you've got capacity to make those adjustments, you can provide an evidence base. So, you've got a response rate of X and you've got to explain the process that you undertook. What you can say is, you told us this, we did this. So you are being flexible, you are providing evidence as to the barriers that providers were experiencing. We've tried to overcome them. Some of them, I talk about sort of the hearts and minds, which is probably the one barrier that we can never overcome. We can help with extending timescales, we can sit and hold the hand doing things, we can address concerns about confidentiality. But if someone says, well, I don't trust that something's going to change, it's very difficult to change that behaviour. But that's something then that you can take away and think, right, well, we're talking about future market sustainability. If everyone has told us, well, I don't believe anything is going to change, there's clearly one of the first pieces of work post this DHSC requirement is about how you work with the market and how you help, I suppose, strengthen that relationship. So there's a multitude of bits of useful information that can come out of the reasons for non-engagement, and also, really importantly, it provides an evidence base as to how you've overcome some of the barriers, which is a justification for the process that you've done, and then ultimately the end output in terms of number of respondents and the data that you have. So I think that's everything from us, Dan.
Thanks both. That's been really helpful. I just had a quick. We've got lots of questions in the chat, which I'll go through. But I just had a quick follow up for Richard, actually based on something that you two raised, and that was just. I wondered, Richard, if you could speak from your experience talking to providers about who the best person to contact is, and also. In your role in Care England, you've worked with some of the larger organisations, and obviously they might be taking a slightly different approach. So I just wondered if you could talk about that quickly.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest kind of misgivings really of local authorities is when they're doing cost of care exercises, and we've seen this a lot in the past, is that the usual distribution list is used to communicate with maybe home managers and those at the care home level, whereas providers who are part of a group or have multiple properties maybe have a sort of more central location or central contact that would manage this type of activity. So, and generally speaking, the larger providers do tend to be part of associations. So we always encourage you to work with the local care provider association or the national associations such as Care England, NCF, NCA, or the CPA, and we'll make sure that your requests are always cascaded directly to the larger providers. Because having come from a larger provider myself, what we recognise is correspondence does tend to go to a home level, and it never really finds its way up through the upper echelons to the management team who are looking at this centrally. And one of the big bugbears that we get from a lot of the larger providers is they knew nothing of an exercise that was going on at the time. Not the case with the fair cost of care, because we've made sure that cascade has always been filtered down from the very early stages to the larger providers. But we always say, please make sure that the person you are working with at a care home level actually has a title of something that they're going to do with this. So there's no point in sending to a care home manager if they've got a finance manager also include, at that care home. But it would be worthwhile asking for people to confirm if they are the right person to engage in the process, and are they the person who's going to be managing this, and if not, then who would that person be?
Thanks, Richard. That's really helpful. And I just firstly wanted to say there's been a few points in the chat that are not questions as such, and probably are best treated as kind of feedback for ourselves. And say I won't raise them as questions, but just say, we have acknowledged them about some of the terminology, and there's a point about the RR return on capital in the iEasy tool. So we'll certainly take away any kind of points of feedback that people have, and really appreciate those. I've got a quick question for, well, it may not be quick, but a question for John and Simon. I want to direct this one at you. How long does it take to complete the home care tool on average? And could you also maybe let us know what the sort of, as well as the average, maybe a maximum acceptable time, do you think, of hours that someone might have to spend on it? Say if they're a provider that may find it particularly complex, or anything you can say on that is helpful.
I guess the initial answer is we don't have those figures in terms of how long it actually takes. It's the spreadsheet's available to download. What we're getting back in, we've got a support mailbox, and we get technical queries back in the mailbox. We're having a lot more in the last couple of weeks than we have had initially, which I think is probably due to this point that we'd said about when the deadline gets closer, people pick the thing up and then have a look and say, right, I need to do something with this now. It's not people have been sat struggling through something for weeks on end. What I would say is I've spoken to providers that you show them it and they say, oh yeah, I've got all of those figures. It'll take me an hour to fill in. Thank you, thanks Dan, appreciate that. We've spoken to providers that say it's taken an hour. I've spoken to providers that have basically given it to their accountant and said, oh, I'm not, they've got an email from a local authority requesting to complete the thing, and they said, yeah, it took them a few hours of time. I think the thing that's time consuming, and this just, I would probably say this doesn't just go for either the home care toolkit or iEasy or whatever you're completing. It's about what information does that person who's at the other end have to hand? And the difficulty with, and I think this goes probably with larger providers, is you might not have one person that has all of the answers. So for instance, if you're looking at occupancy, for instance, or if you're looking at volume of hours that you deliver, they are service level pieces of information. You know, they're information that the managers will have, that's information that the operational staff within the branch or the home will have. But then when you're asking for overhead costs, for instance, the home manager or the registered manager of the branch might not have all of those overhead costs. So there's a what we always say is we recognise that there is a lot of coordination. So the actual sitting down and putting numbers into something, practically speaking, it shouldn't take more than half an hour, either with the home care toolkit or with IEASY. It shouldn't take more than half an hour to an hour. It's gathering the information that's required, and sometimes, you know, you don't always have the. I'll take the point about the return on capital, but there's other things in the you know, when we're asking for volume of hours and different average lengths of time and things like that. Some things organisations might not necessarily routinely capture because, you know, it's not necessary for them running their business. They're unique things that are being asked within a template that businesses might not routinely capture, and therefore it's new information, and obviously it's got to be calculated. So what I would say is, just to answer your second point about what's the stopping point, I would say if you've got a provider who is really struggling, obviously there's the support mailbox. There's all sorts of different types of support available from colleagues here around the room and IEASY who aren't in the room. But you know, technical queries through those elements. If someone's been sat for kind of 2 or 3 days and keeps coming back to something and says, I'm not sure where to start. But again, you know. If you can, as councils, and if you've got good touch points and points of engagement, you know, even just a 10-15 minute conversation to understand what particular issues are, because what you might find is that there are particular areas where someone says, well, I know this, but I don't know this, and I know this, but I don't know this. In that case, there might be a level of knowledge already. It might not be 100%, but if it's kind of 70-80%, you might say, you know what, that's actually okay, because that's actually there's some critical cost information there that's really helpful. You know, John and I always say, look, you know, something is better than nothing, and obviously you've got it, and because you can do something meaningful with that, you know, so anything kind of, if it's not 100% complete, whatever it is, then we can't accept it. You know, I think there's some flexibility in being able to just think critically about what can I get from the market on that one. So I would just probably urge some flexibility there. But yeah, don't, obviously, you know, we've said this on the call already. Providers are not mandated to do anything. It's in their interest, you know, to contribute to this, as it is in all of our interest to be able to make this exercise a success. But you know, if something's becoming too onerous, it's yeah, you end up kind of flogging something, don't you, to death. So I guess that's what my view would be.
Thanks, Simon. I'm going to direct this next question to Leon. The question was asking about how should councils treat a residential provider that they're utilising, but it's actually based outside of their local area. So I don't know if you could talk through that and maybe some scenarios that have kind of been picking up when speaking to councils.
Yeah, I will do. So a good rule of thumb is that for things like quality, safeguarding, etc., the responsibility sits with the host local authority, and we see no reason why that's fundamentally different here. So if you start from the position of you focus on the councils in your local authority, sorry, the providers in your local authority area, and if everyone does that, then we'd expect the quantity of information that's needed. So that's the most simple answer, but this is not a simple situation. What we would so firstly encourage a council to do where they commission placements out of area is to think seriously about if the home or dom care provider commissions a significant amount of what that council commissions, provides a significant amount of what that council commissions, then you might want to contact them. If actually they just happen to have one placement when you've got, 1,000 placements as a council, then you should exercise some judgment there around, will their costs really change what I'm actually trying to do here? So we'd encourage that kind of proportionality element of it as well. I know, for instance, situations maybe in and around London where a council might commission 50% of its care home beds outside of area, but they're dispersed across quite a few providers in probably quite a few neighbouring authorities. We think sub-regional working is a really helpful thing here, and to maybe even come up with a sharing protocol where what you're saying to your providers is, when you're submitting information to me as a host authority, are you also happy for me to share that with a neighbouring authority who commissions a number of placements from you? If you are, great, let's be clear about that, let's be explicit about that. What we can then do is cut out the middleman and share your submission directly with that commissioning authority. So it's just about finding a way that works for people, and I think it would be very reasonable for a provider to say, well, actually, no, I'm not going to share it because I only provide one, out of a 100-bedded care home, I only provide one placement to you. That would be reasonable. Equally, if you're asking them to submit different information from what they've already shared with their host council, it would be again reasonable for them to say no. So I think it's about flagging at an early stage. This is our intention. This is why we want to do what we want to do, keeping in mind that proportionality element, but also thinking, what difference will this make to what my sort of information that I obtain and to what my decisions are. But hopefully, and Richard, I know you want to come in, so hopefully you can give a kind of provider perspective on this. But we think if a provider participates in the exercise, they're fundamentally saying they're comfortable sharing information. So if what you then do with them is very practical and reasonable, there should be no reason that I could see why they wouldn't then share it on with a separate council if they're comfortable that that's a really efficient way of doing it. So I'll pause there and over to you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Leon. I was only going to add, I think for everything you've said makes absolute sense, certainly for the home care model and anybody not using the national iEasy tool for care homes. Obviously, the national tool does have an ability, if you are an out of area local authority, to request to see the data of a provider. So you can, if you are an out of area authority and you've got a significant number of placements in another authority's area, you can simply request from the care homes in question which data you would like to see, and the care home will get a request to confirm or deny whether they'll let you have access to their data once it's been verified by the host authority. Just thought it was helpful to make that point.
Dan, could I just quickly come back to just elaborate a little further, if that's okay? Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say now. Hopefully that deals with it. I think this is what I was going to say. There's a question of, so technically, how might that care provider submit a response? And I'll speak for Richard, because I know when it comes to care homes, the strong advice to care homes is you should just have a single response that covers the entirety of your care home that you would give to any council that you wanted to share that with. Okay, for domiciliary care, it might be slightly different. If, for instance, a care provider delivers in two neighbouring authorities, but where the commissioning practices of those authorities, maybe the kind of geography and the rurality of those authorities, maybe any contractual requirements, mean that the cost base for that provider is fundamentally different depending on which authority they're delivering care to. In those situations, we'd always encourage providers to err on the side of, unless it makes a big difference, just submit a single return. And if there are things that are different, such as travel time, then look to change that element of the return rather than starting from scratch. I think what we've seen so far is where providers try and disentangle their costs and disentangle the amount of provision, things start to go wrong. So for care homes, we should be encouraging them to submit a single return. For domiciliary care, a single return, unless there's a really clear and easy and way to do the alternative, unless there's a really strong reason why your costs are fundamentally different. So that's what I was going to share. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, and I think it's helpful to say at this point, I think Richard mentioned earlier, but we've been working as jointly as organisations, us as CHIP, and working with the CPA to develop a set of FAQs around the guidance and policy, which will pick up some of those slightly more, those sort of complex points that Leon touched on there. I'm going to go back to Leon first with this next question, but others can chip in after. But there may not be much to say on it, but people have asked, do you think there's any particular reason or logic from the department as to why home care is 18 plus and domiciliary residential care is 65 plus? Yeah, any thoughts in response to that question?
Yeah, I've had a look in the chat and I can see sort of similar questions on that subject. The first thing that's important to stress, and I know the people asking the question know this, but the scope is what it is. So let's focus on that from a practical point of view. So if we park that point, that the scope isn't going to change. There's no intention, there's no expectation that it would in any way change. So if we then think about just generally, what's the rationale? The rationale's not been expressed in a very clear or explicit way to us, but the best that I can understand is if we were to ask ourselves, what are when we think of social care, what is the provision that is a greatest cost to a council? What do they spend their most money on? What tends to involve the most people? What is the provision and the elements of provision that feel like they're facing the greatest challenges from a cost point of view? Also things like from a workforce point of view. I think that starts to point very clearly at these two areas of provision. I think the distinction around 18 plus and 65 plus, and it picks up another question in the chat, is and again, I'm speaking quite broadly here, but I think we would understand that if you walked into a care home aimed at supporting older people, and then you walked into one next door supporting much younger adults, you'd see something quite different from a cost point of view. The size of the building's probably likely to be quite different. The way that care and support are provided is likely to be quite different. Again, not from an individual's point of view, but from a cost point of view. So the idea of differentiating 65 plus on care homes, there seems to be sense to that. Less so with domiciliary care. Again, if we put aside the individual's needs and what they receive, from a cost point of view, the provision of domiciliary care tends to be in a unit of time. So just because an individual gets more time than another individual, the way that it's costed would be the same. So again, I'm not an apologist for the approach or the rationale of the guidance. I'm simply trying to give my view of what it is, and it feels like that's more of an element of why the distinction's been chosen. Just seeing the comment around, is it to do with cross subsidy and other things? Again, there's other layers to this that we might all pick up on, but I certainly think with the domiciliary care scope and the idea of focusing on what we might call time and task, I think again, if we think of where the most challenging circumstances are, again thinking about workforce and others, then that again seems to be a logical and rational focus. So I'll leave it there, Dan, but I come back to the first point of whatever we think of the scope is what it is, but I did want to just give my thoughts on why it might be the way it is.
Yeah, thanks, Leon. And there is maybe just for clarity, if we could just sort of reconfirm the scope for home care and how that works. There is a question that says about, there only seems to be one sort of category of home care being collected, and should different levels of complexity and service users be identified. And I think this speaks to the point you raised earlier, Leon, about sort of time and task care. And if you want to sort of reiterate that point about what the DHSC is thinking of as in scope for home care, and what is out of scope.
Yeah. So really what we're here to do today is to support, is to give councils the best of our knowledge of how to arrive at a reasonable position by mid-October. So with that in mind, the Department of Health grant conditions, no element of what they've set out requires you to get into that level of detail about starting to understand different groups with different needs. And again, I come back to the point that generally speaking, because domiciliary care is in units of time, as long as people are following the scope, they'll generally get to a representative picture, as long as they're excluding things like reablement provision, rapid response provision, which, as they're very clearly out of scope. I think what this question probably also talks to is the requirement is around is very specific in the guidance, but what councils are encouraged to do is, once they've met those conditions, how the council wants to use the information they've obtained, work with their providers, how they want to use that to improve and change things going forward, it is entirely up to them. And there's requirements in around what they might do and how they might choose to use that information. But that goes well beyond specific scope, that goes well beyond Annex A, and that's about saying to councils, you've obtained a data set that you need to report in a specific way, but actually how else can you use that data set? And what you then might choose to do by way of setting future fees, by way of supporting providers, by way of bringing in other intelligence that you have to inform your thinking is entirely up to you, and is deliberately silent in the guidance, because this is not about directing your decision making. This is about making sure there's a robust picture of evidence across the country. So I would just make sure you distinguish what I need to do to meet the conditions compared to what I might do as a commissioner, finance colleague within a council.
Thanks, Leon. Sorry, Richard, you've raised your hand. Do you want to just come in on that point?
Yeah, it was only really it might be more for Simon or John, but from a home care perspective, if you are a domiciliary provider or a home care provider and you're providing average visits of 30, 45 or 60 minutes, but you've also got a significant part of your business which is maybe overnight care or sleep-ins, that will distort your average fees. So it's just to be alert to that. I don't know whether John or Simon want to just kind of clarify what you were doing in that instance, because I have been advising people to submit those on 2 separate sheets, because one will distort the other quite significantly.
You're right, it will, and I think this is part of the recognition that maybe less so for care homes, but certainly for home care, there's a real mixed economy of businesses. Practically speaking, letter of the guidance, just ignore it in its totality. The challenge that a provider will then have is, how do you apportion costs based on parts of an income of your business? Can't really give a hard and fast answer as to that. You could do it by the number of hours that you deliver in one portion of the business to another. You can do it by the income that's generated from one portion of the business to another. There's no hard and fast rule, as long as providers are aware that if they're only submitting for part of their business, let's say that 50% of the business is that traditional dom care, short visits, as it says in the guidance. I can't quote it verbatim, it's not in front of me, but if 50% of the business is that, then as long as what someone submits as cost is all of those kind of fixed costs as part of the business, such as overheads and everything, is also divided by 2 to represent that half of the cost gets apportioned to that and half gets apportioned to another part of the business that is not in scope of the exercise, then you're always going to be calculating a unit cost accurately. But it's a very individualized situation for every provider in terms of how they're going to do that, and obviously it's just a case of being able to advise as to what they do.
Thanks. I've got a question here from Andrew, which I think is another one for you, John and Simon. Should HBC providers, and I think we're referring to home-based care there, but please correct me if I'm wrong, should they submit single returns per their branch or one return for the whole organisation, and they're thinking about that in the context of their large regional providers of home care. So I know there's sort of functionality within the tool for thinking about branches, so if you could just expand on that for us, please.
Whatever's easiest for the provider. You can submit more than one branch's worth of costs into a single toolkit, and to be honest, you don't even need to use that. I know there's a kind of like a branch calculator. Practically speaking, if you've got two branches, you've got two registered managers, you've got two sets of rent rates and utilities. If you add them all together, you can put them all in one set of overheads in the bottom, or a provider can. So and as long as obviously they roll up the volume of hours for both of the branches, then everything it makes no difference whether that's two different entities or one thing. I guess what you may want to know as a commissioner is, does one branch have a materially different cost base to another one? I would be interested in that personally if I had two branches. So I may be inclined to say, well, it'd be good to know the differences between those two. But again, I come back to this point about flexibility. Are they really keen to get involved? Is it one of those things where you need to really work with them to get information? In which case, you've got to I guess sense check and say, either I've got to make it easy to get the right level of data, or I know that this is a provider that I can work with and is really keen to work with me to get something to dive into this in a bit more detail. So I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Simon. What I'm going to do now is I know Richard, you need to go shortly, so I wanted to open up to you for any kind of final reflections, or maybe your sort of plea of what you would like councils and commissioners to be doing. Open to you, anything you want to say.
I would say, local authorities, please join up with your neighbours and contact us if you would like support, and we'll try and do some collective support for a group of councils. I'm running out of diary time to do that individually now, but if you would like support, if you would like us to come and demo any of the tools, if you'd like to do us to do FAQs or to talk to your provider community, then please invite us to meetings where you can. Give us a slot, 10-15 minutes would be fine, an hour if you want sort of demos and Q&A, but please work with us. But please continue to cascade as much information as possible to those providers who are not part of associations. And if you'd rather just work with us on a joint cascade, we're very happy to work with you. Pop logos onto letters that go out so it can be seen that this is a supported activity by us as an association, and we will offer our support to all providers, regardless whether they're members of our association or not. We will offer support to any provider to help them participate in this process.
There's been a question about, has there been any information provided about what the future of grant funding looks like from the department in terms of the coming years? And I think that maybe means beyond that kind of headline figure that we showed on the first slide.
To repeat what was on the first slide, this year there's that 25-75% split, around the 25% being used to support these exercises. The 75% should be going on fee increases to support care providers. It's been made clear that subsequent years funding should also be used to submit to increase provider fees. So there is clarity about the amount in the next 2 years, and there's clarity about the purpose of that money. I think what you'd not be surprised to hear is that both Richard's organisations and other care organisations and ourselves through ADAS, through Local Government Association, are lobbying very heavily around, yeah, this is a grant for a specific thing, but this is a drop in the ocean around how you would best address social care, the challenges facing the social care sector. And we think this evidence that will come out of these exercises is really helpful in that. So I would treat this as a small and specific pot of funding that will will help what we're trying to achieve. But rather than say, well, we think it's a little bit more or a little bit different, the conversation that we're having and continue to have is around, let's take a step back here and say, as part of this work, what should social care look like, and what are the funds necessary to support that? And as I said, that's one of the main reasons why we're encouraging councils and providers to work together to obtain the evidence to demonstrate that and to support that message. So I guess the short answer is no, we're not clear on what future funding looks like beyond what I shared on the first slide, but that will be an ongoing conversation. And
Richard, did you want to come in?
I think Leon's probably covered it, but it was just to say that we're doing a huge amount of work at the CPA to lobby for additional funding. We're in regular conversation with Gillian Keegan, Michelle Dyson, Sajid Javid directly, pressurising them quite hard for the additional funding that we know is needed. So as what we're recognising now is we need to do more work with local authorities to help lobby for the money that we need. So any local authorities that can share early indicative information prior to when they submit in October, it's going to be incredibly helpful for us to make sure that we can do all we can to try and lobby for more funding prior to when the allocations get set in sort of September, October this year, because it'll be too late for us to lobby for more money for next year once we wait till October the 14th. That's all I was going to kind of just say on that one. I'm going to have to love you and leave you now, but just to say thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to everyone today.
Thanks, Richard. Leon.
Yeah, it's hopefully related. I tried to answer a question in the chat, and he's obviously thrown up more questions, which I should have learned my lesson. Just to say about the future of these exercises, so the Department of Health hasn't said, oh, and by the way, we expect every council to do this each year. That's not been said yet, and we think if that was their intention, they would have said that. What is clear is this is a statement of intent that says from the department to the sector that says we think you should understand and continue to understand evidence around costs of care and use that in your future decision making. What I think will be different in subsequent years is there won't be this rigid and you will need to do it in this way and you'll need to have done it by mid-October and you will need to submit A, B and C. So I don't think there'll be the direction of how you do it, but I think the intention, the expectation around councils and providers will work together to understand changing costs will absolutely be with us for a long time to come. And I suppose the distinction around how that happens is maybe that you might not go out to all providers to ask all information about every cost line each year. What you might do is work with a slightly smaller group of providers to understand what's changed from last year and then to address that, which might just slightly lessen what you do. But this is all for councils choosing with providers to work in the way that best suits them, rather than being prescriptive. And I don't think there's a right and wrong way to do that, as long as it works for the local area and feels both helpful and equally proportionate as well.
Thanks, Leon. So I think, and I know Rich's got to drop off now, but he's shared the details, his contact details, but I just wanted to confirm a few practicalities with everyone on the call. So just to confirm, a few people have asked, we will share the slides from this session. We will, of course, also share the links to the various videos that we've referenced and pieces of guidance that we've referenced, and contact details for not only ARC and IEAS's sort of help desk for the tools, but also how you can get in touch with me and Leon, and how you can get in touch with Richard at the Care Provider Alliance as well. Just to say, we are recording this session, and our intention will be to get a recording of this session online via YouTube, and we'll be sharing the link to that once it's ready with everyone who's been on this call. So we've still got 10 minutes of time left, so I'm just going to open it up in case there are any final comments that Simon, John or Leon would like to make. Leon, so you put your hand up.
So just a quick practicality bit. It's been asked in the chat. The session next week is an identical version of this. Yeah. OK, so you are more than welcome to join, but the first hour of it will be literally you hearing what you've already heard today. That's just about availability and trying to do a session really quickly to get the video up online, but also recognising other people might want to join next week. So I just wanted to make sure, conscious people are leaving, just wanted to make that point very clear to people. But if anyone else wants to, John, Simon, if you want to add anything generally, please go for it.
No, I don't think there's anything from our perspective. Obviously, Dan will send contact details for the support. So if there's anything anything from a technical perspective in relation to the tool, then we will help, and we're working very closely with Leon and Dan and meet regularly. So we're feeding back anything that's coming through the support, particularly from providers, that then obviously we can feed back to the process in terms of sort of FAQs around the entire sort of activity. So no, thank you for your time. Hope it's been useful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So I'm going to bring this session to a close now and give everyone a couple of minutes back, and thanks for all your feedback in the chat as well. That's really appreciated. And yeah, thanks everyone.